This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Let us go to Jay in Eastvale, California. Hi, Jay. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you for everything that you do for us. You've been such a huge blessing for me personally.
Well, praise
I have
God.
a question. Yesterday, this is a question I don't know how to answer, and I'm hoping you can help me out. Yeah, you brought up a point in one of the things you were saying about how God in his nature cannot commit sin, which is true, and I believe. My question is, how do we explain to somebody that says, if that's the case, then how could he create the devil who committed sin? And so I struggle with that.
That's a good question. Yeah, really good question. Well, let's look at a couple angles here. The first thing is, you're right. Let's just posit that truth that God cannot do anything, or he cannot do anything or be anything that is contrary to his nature as infinite and all good and all knowing and all those infinite attributes that are true of God alone. Okay. And those are not limitations. I think I used an example. Can God create an object so heavy that even he can't lift it? Well, it's a contradiction in terms, because God cannot do anything inconsistent with his nature. So, God, for example, God can't make a square circle. He can't make a round square, because those are contradictory. They're two different things. So if we start at this point and say God cannot do or be anything that is contrary to his nature, which is all perfect, all good, all loving, infinitely powerful, knowing, etc., then as we look at this question that you're asking, how can he create a being, whether an angelic being or a human being? Because animals don't count, insects don't count. They're not moral beings. They can't commit sin. They don't have free will. They don't have a rational intellect. So we're really just looking at two classes of beings, angels and humans.
Yes.
Well, I think the answer is this. The answer is because anything that is not God is a creature, and any creature is limited, finite, in other words, and therefore subject to corruption, subject to error, to sin. So in these two categories of beings, angels and human beings, the linchpin to all of it, I believe, is that God created us with free will. And free will is a necessary component for us to be able to love God in return. He loved us first, the Bible says. While we were still yet sinners, he loved us first. And we can see this by the fact that even before we even existed, God's idea of you and of me and of Father Rocky and of Cyrus and every single person, or for that matter, every single being that God ever created directly or indirectly, he did so out of love. And in our case, as in the case of the angels, he did so for the purpose of our being able to respond to his love with our love. We're not slaves, as the Muslims think. Allah is not our God is not a master looking at his properties, his slaves, that kind of thing. We have a loving Father who loves us, and he wants us to love him, but we can only love him, properly speaking, if we're free. That's where this issue comes in. So, creatures are subject to corruption. Not all creatures do get corrupted. Look at the good angels, for example. They pass the test. But even they, as high above us as they are in the created order, even they were subject to this possibility of being corrupted and falling into sin. So I think it's those two things that are the answer. A, they're not God. Only God has that perfect attribute. And B, you always run a risk in the case of a free will decision to love somebody. I'll leave it at this, Jay. Maybe you have a few follow-ups. Did you ever in your life ever love someone who didn't love you back?
Yeah, for sure.
And it hurts, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Most of human music and songs, etc., are based upon that premise that everybody experiences, that unrequited love where, in this case, it doesn't hurt God the way it hurts you if the girl breaks up with you. But we can at least catch a glimpse of this, that she's free to say yes or no. She's free. Yes. And if she says, you know what, I dig you, I do like you, I want to go out with you, I want to get married to you, etc., that's great. That's probably the greatest thing in human experience that anyone can go through. But when she says, not so much, that's the risk that we take when we love somebody, because they may or may not love us back. And this is the risk that God takes. It's not a risk in the sense that he doesn't know what's going to happen. Oh my gosh, let's wait and see. Which way is he going to go? God knows everything all at once. But there's still, and for us it's really pronounced, that there's the risk that in spite of God's love, in spite of the fact that he created you, in spite of the fact that he gives you so many blessings, and he wants you to be happy, and he died on the cross for you, and he's giving you everything necessary so you can be happy with him in heaven, there's still that risk for you to say, not so much. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's my long-winded answer. What do you think, Jay?
No, I totally appreciate that. I guess part of the struggle is, I get that we're finite beings, and he's the one that's infinite, mm-hmm. which is the obvious, right? We're the creation, he's a creator. Mm-hmm. I guess the part of the struggle that's still there is that why is in this aspect of being a creation, why is, I guess, I don't know how to word it, but that sin is an option. You know what I mean? That if we came from something that is all perfect, all good, all love, it feels like sin also has to have a source. And so
it does.
Okay.
I think this is the sticking point. I think I can reach in and tweak the issue here.
Okay.
It seems like maybe, if I'm reading you correctly, that the mistake is that you're assuming that because we come from an all-perfect God, that therefore we must somehow be all perfect because we come from him. That's the breakdown here.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just think about that for a minute. The only thing, and by thing I mean being, the only being who is all perfect, infinite, unsusceptible to corruption or sin or defect or loss or lack or anything like that, the only being is God. And every other thing in the universe, every other being, and if there is a multiverse and all the other universes, all of these things are inherently flawed and limited because we're creatures. So it is true that God, who is all perfect, creates us, but he doesn't create us as all perfect. Otherwise, we would be gods. We would be...
Okay, yeah.
And that's impossible. That's getting back to the question of, can God do something contrary to his own nature? So let's look at it this way. Could God create another God? Obviously not. Because in order to be God, it is a uniqueness. He is infinite in every respect. So if he could, quote unquote, create another God, which is like, let's just say, making a square circle or a round square, it's a contradiction in terms. But let's just say, for the purpose of discussion, that God could do that. Well, then he couldn't be God because he's not that. He's limited. He would not have something that other God has. So the uniqueness of God, if you think about it, is the foundation of us understanding that when he makes us, even though he's all perfect, he doesn't make us all perfect because he can't. And it's not a limitation of his. It would just be contrary to his own nature. Mm-hmm. So we experience our defects and lacks and corruption in some cases, etc. But the source, and getting back to your question there, what is the source of evil? It's your free will choice. That's the source. Mm-hmm. God is not the source of evil, but when he creates a being like an angel or a human being who has free will, which we do, and is endowed with an intellect and a will, which we have, then our choice is to say to God, no thanks. That's the source of evil. And that evil can be understood, I'll leave it at this, Jay, can be understood in two general categories. You have moral evil, which is these free will choices that involve lying, killing, stealing, and the panoply of different sins that we can commit. Then you have physical evils that are not directly associated with a free will choice, such as tsunamis, earthquakes, falling down the stairs and breaking your leg, cancer. Those are natural evils. But in both categories, natural evil and moral evil, they're not actual things. Evil is not a thing. It's not a substance. In other words, it resides in the free will decisions of angels and human beings. And that's our fault. God gives us everything to avoid it, but we have a way of finding our way into it, don't we?
We do. That answer, that second part of our conversation, that hit me real hard. So that was kind of what I was looking for, and you answered it. And so I really appreciate that.
I'm really glad. I really am. And if you, you're obviously a deep thinker, so I would recommend the works of Frank Sheed, Sheed. If you get a chance, pick up his book, Theology and Sanity. Theology and Sanity. I think you'll love it.
Okay.
It's good brain food. Thanks for calling, Jake. You can join me by listening to The Patrick Madrid Show on the Relevant Radio app, live each weekday at 8 to 11 a.m. And thanks for listening.